Hey everyone, so today I am here in Montana with my buddy James here, and we are here to do some stuff about AKs. And in this video, we're going to be addressing how you can modernize an AK. People have been messing around with modernizing ARs, for a long time. This is stuff that everyone's going to be familiar with. We are now using free float, lightweight M-LOK handguards. You can put infrared lasers and illuminators for night vision, white lights, integrating suppressors has been a thing forever, flat top rails for mounting optics, more improved ergonomics. There's been a lot of development in ARs. However, I think a lot of people are looking past AKs. When people think of AKs, they think of your bog standard AKM, wood furniture, slant brake, a really basic, some would say outdated gun.
How dare you?
I know.
How dare you?
I just rustled some jimmies. But I think a lot of people underestimate what the AK market has become and what is now available in the market. So my friend James here, I have him on because he's really tight into the AK world. I would say you've got a pretty good finger on a pulse of what's going on, and you're also familiar with some really cool systems that are being developed. What has been your perspective on the progression of the AK market over the last decade or so?
Yeah, so I think, and this is just all my personal opinion on the progression and even where it's at today, but the AK market is like late to the party of modifying, and I think it's because it's such a complex weapon as we compare it to like an AR, where an AR you can just kind of, the parts are available, they're manufactured here, you can grab them, you can put them together in your garage, or you don't even really need many tools at all to do it. It's very inexpensive to do, whereas the AK, you're riveting things together. There's a lot of drilling, grinding, fitting. It's not a simple process, which is kind of ironic when you think about the AK platform, where it started with milled and they switched to this stamped riveted pattern so that it was easier to mass produce. But in the United States, for a guy in his garage, it's not something easy to do. You need well over $1,000 in tooling, a lot of skills, a lot of knowledge, and it's quite a process. Nothing just fits together. So to see that growth, or that progression of being able to modernize them with some of these things to be able to put these devices and stuff on, it hasn't been just an overnight thing. But I think people just kind of this is refined. I don't know that there's much more we can do to the AR, and now people are kind of bored. They're looking for the next thing. Where else can we go? We know the AK is a great rifle. We know that it's got reliability. We know it's got the capacity that you need for a fight. We know it can handle it. And so what can we do to get it to where it can compete with these sorts of modern adjustments? And so I think that's where people have been going, and that's why it's happening. But I also think that's why it's late to get there.
That makes sense. I think in a lot of cases, I feel like there's a misunderstanding about the AK world and just the general perception here in the United States as this kind of archaic gun that's cheap and easy to build, and there's not a whole lot you can do with it. But like you said, it's not as simple as just slapping parts together. When people say they build ARs, really you're just assembling a Lego set, and you can literally do it, like you said, with minimal tools. I think when I first started putting ARs together, I had a wrench and I had a screwdriver, and I was able to put an entire AR together with just those two tools. Like you said, you're pressing rivets. You're needing a lot of, well, if you're doing it well, you need hydraulic presses and everything else, and it's not as straightforward as you think. And then, as you mentioned too, there's no mil spec for AK, so there's always a lot of fine tuning you have to do on the consumer end to get things to work. So it is definitely late to the party. But
yeah, and I think there's two more points on that. You mentioned the spec, and that kind of triggers a thought. There's so many countries that got their hands on this that all seem to put their own little twist, and majority of them generally use the same spec of receiver, the same kind of orientation rivets, or the same spec of rivets even. And so there's a lot of that, but you still have a lot of variance with, like, your barrel journals, things like that. So putting all this stuff together isn't like an AR where you just put the barrel on, slide something, tighten some screws or some Allen heads, and you're done. This is all press fit, and so all these journals are different, and there's it just depended on who made them and when, and what factory even within that country. So there could be a lot of variance to that. The other thing that I think also contributed to the AK being late to the party is a lot of the I won't say a lot of the advancements in the AR, but the good advancements that came with the AR over the last 10 years, and maybe even longer, came from people, innovators that had to use this thing in real environments for their job. So we had this Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom go on, and the people that carried these things daily and used them in situations that their life was on the line found what didn't work. And a lot of these really self-thinker types came back, we all know their names, came back and said, hey, I got a way to make this better, and started thinking about they were thinking about this when they're in the sandbox, they're thinking about it when they came home. They started creating companies after they got out to refine this so that it was the way they wish it was when their ass was on the line. And now you've seen all these explosion of things. And of course, for every one of those, there's 10 companies that come along that make some advancement that just they think is cool, and it really isn't contributing to the betterment of the platform. But you didn't have that with AK. These guys weren't over there running AKs predominantly, so they didn't come up with all the better ways to do things with the AK and come home and make brands around that to better the platform. So now you're starting to see some innovators that are looking for other areas where there's problems to be solved, and we're just now starting to get that.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much why I believe it's late to the party.
Sure. Yeah, and I think those are really good points that we have. Like, this is part of our national identity with the AR-15. It's America's rifle. That's what we're familiar with, and the AK has always kind of been the other, and there's in some cases been a lot of pushback against AKs in certain circles. And even with that being said, you know, the AK we have here, this is one that you've built, and we have some stuff that, you know, we have an ACOG on here that
Placeholder.
It's a placeholder for showing how optics can be potentially integrated into something like this. But, you know, early AK accessories, early attempts to modernize AKs was just, well, slap a rail on it, kind of bolt a rail to it, you know, real gross things that added a lot of weight and not always a lot of functionality. But the market has been pushing more and more into, you know, a configuration more like this that is, some people might not say that there's a gap that needs to be closed between this and the AR, but in my opinion, is really closing the gap between the full potential that you can get out of the system and a lot's going on here, and thanks to some really cool minds in the industry.
Yeah, and so I think too, like on an AK, the advancements we've had over the years, or over the life of the AK pattern, has been obviously going from a milled to a stamped. Then you had, you know, Germany tried to lighten it by incorporating polymers. You had, you know, the side folding stocks with the Russians and Bulgarians. You've had countries come along and put the rail mounts on the side so you can come up with a dust cover and put an optic. And really, like, stuff like that, I never liked that. I don't like that. You've had companies come along, and again, I love innovation, even if it doesn't work out, but it's attempts, right? So you've had things that bring a rail out over your dust cover quite a ways to be able to put, and it makes it harder to get your dust cover off. There's just different things. One of the ones I really liked that came along, I don't know how many years ago now, was replacing your gas tube with a railed gas tube. Ultimac was the company, and it gave you a great way to put a microdot that co-witnessed.
Put a flashlight on there.
Yeah, and you can put that on any AK. That was a wonderful advancement, and it held pretty true. So you've seen these innovations, but Ultimac's a great example of when Americans started grabbing this platform and putting some attention to it. Prior to that, the main advancements weren't really geared around using lights or optics. They were really kind of about either shortening it, making it lighter, or, you know, being able to fold it up, things like that. And now you're seeing, like, let's figure out how we can get our optics, our lasers, our lights, our night visions, you know, our tactics into this platform.
Yeah. And I mean, and even just little things like triggers, you know, AKs were never known for having good triggers. There was a sliding scale of quality there depending on country of origin. And there were some interesting options, but now you got companies like ALG making a pretty phenomenal trigger at an extremely reasonable price that has been really helping get more people.
But, yeah, you're not going to get an AR trigger for that price.
No, especially not one that feels that way. So I'll let you kind of walk us through this guy. So this is one that you put together, correct?
Yeah. So, you know, this is the Occam Handguard, OCCAM. You're probably going to link that.
Yep.
I have the pleasure of being personal friends with Brian, the innovator and creator of, and brainchild of Occam, I guess, or that's his brainchild. And so I've kind of gotten the pleasure of seeing the inner workings and getting to kind of get in his mind and his innovation. But he's one that comes to mind as a true innovator of the platform, taking things to to the next level. And what he really did was he started in other areas, but one of the things he came out with when I first met him was it replaced the rear sight block, which again you have to plan that in your build or take your whole rifle apart to do this. But it was a railed sight that you could still use as a fixed sight, but you could put a micro dot on. It was really cool. Worked very well, held true, and gave you an option for your micro dot. If you didn't need the dot, you could take it off. So that was the downside, was you couldn't use it as a co-witness. But it was a true innovation, and from there it kind of springboarded him into taking this up a notch. So he designed the handguard that you see here, which is called the Merc handguard. Again, you're planning this into your build because you don't have the handguard retainer. You have to take your gas block, sight blocks off and everything to be able to do it, because its mount replaces your rear sight block, gives you a true free float handguard, which I believe is the first true free float handguard for an AK, and allows you now a M-lock rail system so that you can place what you want where you want it. When we talk about the AR, I hate quad rails.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that's the worst thing. Well, not the worst. We can make that a separate video, but it's bad. It was a great idea when it came out, and because it was the first thing that you could mount stuff to, it worked. But it's gone. It's over. You can't cheese grate your hand on an M-lock. And so Brian did a phenomenal job here of keeping things clean and ergonomic, allowing you to really run the system while being able to mount multiple things. So I think this takes it up a notch, because you can't just put an optic co-witnessed. You get to put a flashlight and other things, sling points. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And he's got sling points integrated in, but if you want to dovetail off like you would your AR or something like that, you can keep things very true, and it's also lightweight. So that's one example of a really good modernization, American innovation in the gun.
And the lightweight is a part that I want to emphasize, because again, I think so many people have experience with those early attempts to modernize AKs, which you might have added rail space, but you also added 3 pounds to your gun, and it's just this giant unwieldy mess. So when people see handguards like this on an AK, they just assume that it's now a super heavy gun. And honestly, it's one of those things you have to be able to fully appreciate it. But these Merc handguards are really not that heavy, but you're also adding the option of rear mounting a red dot without affecting your dust cover. It's literally integral into the gun at this point, so you don't have to worry about losing zero. Having an infrared illuminator or laser up here on top. I've got your white light here on the other side here. You're adding that capacity back in to be able to have all of those cool force multiplying gadgets that you couldn't have done before.
So these are just placeholders on here. This isn't how I would configure it if I was running it, but we just wanted to stick some stuff on to show you the amount of stuff you can put on, and it's very light. It feels just like an AR in that regard. But what's neat about it too is you can notice the rail shoots out over the dust cover a little ways. Not enough to be a problem with being able to get in and field strip the rifle, but it does extend the sight picture. If you're just running irons, it extends it, 2-3 inches there, which gives you, a lot more accuracy, as well as opening up that space to be able to put multiple items. And like I say, it's built in. That's a problem. You buy it, you can't really do it unless you're an AK builder or have the tooling. But Occam sells their rifles pretty. I don't know if you guys have been paying. The time this video is being filmed, if you're paying attention to the AK market, things have gotten pretty Western. It's growing faster than real estate. It's extremely expensive to get into and have a halfway decent AK. Occam Defense is building AKs as carriers for their handguards. Essentially, you're getting a gun out of the box already with something like that, but you're getting it from pristine builders. I think you're probably going there in a couple of days, and you'll get to see the inner workings. With these guys are like, it's like. They're doing Elon Musk shit.
Yeah, it's like if you got NASA or SpaceX to start building AKs, it's like that level of like
precision,
really nerding out about what you can actually get out of the design.
You're getting versus something like this, which I did it to the best of my abilities with some direction and picking Brian's brain a bit, but it's at the end of the day, it's not Brian's build. He's got his gas systems absolutely super tuned. Like if you're planning to if you think it might ever run a silencer, the Occam gun's a good way to go. I did mine with a side folder, but we'll talk about that in a second. Remind me on the rails, the rear, but yeah, you're just getting a lot of your rivets are perfect. Your gas system's perfect. Your the way the bolt runs, everything is perfectly tuned. The inner tolerances of every little thing are refined to a nerd level engineering. So there's those are advancements, but really what I want to talk about in this one was that handguard, and then now I'll cycle back. Another great advancement, and I think there's probably several companies doing this. But rear trunnions, they're doing flat back Picatinny railed rear trunnions. What that's kind of opened up, if it's built into the rifles, and again, you gotta, if you have an AK that you want to modernize, that's something it's got to be drilled out of where. But they're building them into a lot of these newer ones, and I think it's a noteworthy point on American innovation on the platform. But it allows you to put whatever stock you want, which, because of that, now it opens up a plethora of stock options. So you're seeing a lot of companies making new stocks, and there's, from folders to just fixed stocks, there's a lot of different options, whether they hold cleaning kits or whatever, different angles, different feel. And so
cheek razors.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of unique stuff there too. So I think the two big changes in modernization of the AK that are starting to happen with the AK innovation is things like this Merc handguard and stock options in the rear.
Yeah. I mean, anything that would work on a SIG MCX with that Picatinny rail on the back, you're going to be able to run on these. And I'm a huge fan of the 100 series side folders, like what's on there. It's a really secure lockup. Most of the old folding stocks on a lot of other guns, when you have them locked in place, they're kind of wobbly. These have been good, but again, with the amount of innovation that's been going on with other guns that have a bufferless system where they can have folding stocks, there's some really cool stuff coming out in that respect. And then one thing you touched on earlier is integrating silencers, and that seems to be something that's been growing more and more in the AK world. If you talked about silencing an AK, you would get laughed out of the room not that long ago. However, it's becoming more and more standard. Again, this almost seems like an ad for Occam Defense at this point, but I know that they're integrating these dead air muzzle devices into all their stuff with the idea of it being suppressor ready. And what is it? Brown Bear is importing large amounts of subsonic 7.62x39. It's really starting to get to the point where you may not have all of the ergonomic advancements that you get from moving into an AR, but again, that gap is getting a lot closer between AKs and ARs at this point, where I can be running a silencer with night vision, modern optics, more modern ergonomics, and have a pretty mean fighting setup.
Yeah, and when you talk about silencers too, there's becoming more availability on stuff like that with companies like Dead Air. Also on muzzle devices, you got companies like JMac kicking out a bunch of unique muzzle devices and additional add-ons, and those are actually things that you don't need to be an AK gunsmith to do. So there's a lot of neat stuff there. And one final point that I think that's very interesting now that we have these two laid out that is worth talking about. And I'll go back to bringing up the Madi here, but this is your standard AK look. This is as close to the original Russian look as you get. But if you have to do something in the civilian sector today and you pull this out and you've got to go to work, you look like the bad guy. I don't care how good of a good guy you are. Yeah. This is not the look that that the public has been conditioned to think of as a good guy. Yeah. When you take some of these modern advancements and you take a rifle like this, it looks like an AR. You look like a SWAT guy, which a lot of buyers want to look like that. They want to John Wick it. But the real advancements here that we talked about are the reason to do it. But the side byproduct there is that if you're wanting AK reliability, you're comfortable with the AK platform, you like this stuff, and you have something like this, you've got that good guy look too, as a kind of a byproduct or a benefit of that. So, and
we can talk until we're blue in the face and make a whole lot of video whether that should be the public perception, but the reality is that's the world that we live in. So I think that's an interesting point to bring up.
It's just a unique byproduct of it. That's all.
Yeah. And one other thing too that's been interesting in the AK world is there's always been multiple calibers, 5.45, 7.62x39 being the predominant two. With things going on, 545 is kind of ebbing and flowing as far as its popularity, but there are other things that are being integrated into it. People are building them in a lot of different calibers these days. 9x39 is still pretty niche. It might pick up steam if ammo can come into the country at any regularity, but there's just a lot more going on in the AK world than there has been for decades and decades leading up to the last 5-6 years. And so it's been really neat to kind of see how it goes. And I think, again, a lot of people underappreciate what the AK brings to the table. And again, with a lot of these modern advancements, it's always been a viable fighting rifle, but even more so now with these modern capabilities.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually thought about that earlier before we started, but the AK to me has always been a fighting rifle first and foremost. And in the last 10, 15 years has stepped into that collector category as well. So it's kind of riding both categories because, I mean, guns like I just pulled up there, that's a very much a collector rifle. You're going to pay a lot of money for something like that, but it's still a viable fighting rifle. As the AR platform has progressed to what it is today, and as tactics and just things have grown in society, that's becoming less and less a fighting rifle, and in the very near future, it's going to probably be just standalone in that collector category. And so stuff like this is keeping it viable, and it's unique to see. So
yeah, it's awesome. And speaking of that collector thing, we're going to be doing more videos here with James while we're in Montana. So we are going to be talking about some of the cool collector AKs that are out there and ones that you can look out for on your own. And we're also going to be doing another video talking about if you are in the market for an AK, things to look out for. Because especially right now, as we're filming this, April of 2021, the market's not great. And there's a lot of people selling a lot of, a $400 gun for $1,500 because that's where the market is. So especially if you don't have experience with this, we're going to be talking about what things you can look for as a consumer before you buy one at a gun show and have nothing but regret, and then also animosity towards the gun. And I've heard Jim Fuller say this before. The thing about the AK is it's such a good design, you can build it poorly and it'll still work. And so there's a lot of poorly built AKs out there that have given people this impression of what the AK is. And I think a lot of people underestimate what it can be when it's actually done right. And again, we're going to help you guys hopefully get an idea of what to look out for there. One thing I want to mention too is if you are into AKs, James is involved with a company called Factory 47. You guys see me wear this shirt all the time. So if you have a favorite country, I love Bulgarian AKs, which him and I were talking about earlier today, whether or not he likes Bulgarian AKs. But if you're into Romanian AKs, anything like that, you can pick up swag to go along with that and let everyone know that Bulgarian AKs are the way. So,
yeah. And what's cool about the Factory 47 apparel is it's very heavily based on like the factory marks and all the unique little differences between all the variants. So the apparel is fairly non-threatening when you're sporting your brand, if you will, or your favorite flavor of AK. It's kind of like a bat signal. Yeah. You're letting all your homies out there know, like, hey, double circle 10 on a shirt. That guy's one of me. Yeah. He's my homie. I don't even know him, but he's my guy. Yeah. And nobody else even knows it's a gun shirt. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, you got a Man on the Moon logo on your shirt.
Yeah.
No one's going to know what that is to be offended if you live in a pretty blue area like I do. But the people who know will know.
Yeah, that's right. So
it's pretty cool. All right. Well, James, thanks very much for taking the time. And again, definitely stay tuned for more videos. I'll have links to what this guy is doing down in the comment section down below, along with some information about Occam if you want to look into some of the accessories we talked about earlier in the video. But with that being said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.